The ATACAMA humanoid is still a mystery even after the Stanford University research has been concluded. This is by Dr. Stephen Greer. After 6 months of research by leading scientists at Stanford, the ATACAMA humanoid is still a profound mystery. The humanoid was first discovered in 2003 in a remote Atacama desert region of Chile. He says, I did not learn of the existence of the specimen until 2009, when I visited the area to examine the mummy-like remains of the humanoid in Barcelona, Spain. In the summer of 2012, Ramon Navia Osorio Villar, president of Instituto de Investigación y Estudios Exobiológicos, graciously permitted our team to do further tests on this humanoid. He says, we traveled to Barcelona, Spain, late September 2012 to obtain detailed x-rays, CAT scans, and take genetic samples for testing at Stanford University. Dr. Gary Nolan, Rashford and Carlotta A. Harris professor in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology at Stanford University School of Medicine, headed up the team examining the human-like specimen. I just want to remind you that Dr. Stephen Greer is an ER doctor, so he's knowledgeable about anatomy, obviously. So Dr. Gary Nolan headed up the team examining the human-like specimen. He suggested the protocol for taking the DNA samples, and in consultation with Dr. Ralph Lachman, also from Stanford, suggested precisely which X-rays and CT scan images would be needed for the proper evaluation of the skeletal anomalies of this thing. Dr. Lachman, who is a visiting scholar and visiting professor at Stanford University, and author of Radiology of Syndromes, Metabolic Disorders, and Skeletal Dysplasias, is one of the leading experts in the world on skeletal dysplasias and abnormalities, while he examined the x-rays, the CAT scans, and the photographs of this humanoid, so he should know what he's looking at. He says, we obtained excellent DNA material by surgically dissecting the distal ends of 2 right anterior ribs on the humanoid. These clearly contained bone marrow material, as was seen on the dissecting microscope that was brought in for the procedure. The bone marrow and other material from the skull were obtained under sterile surgical procedures and placed directly into sterile containers provided by Dr. Nolan. Using forensic documentation procedures, this evidence was then hand-delivered by me to Dr. Nolan in Washington, D.C., October 2012. Dr. Nolan proceeded to set up a very detailed protocol needed for the examining ancient or old DNA. This is a highly specialized area of research, and the leading scientists in the world with expertise in this area consulted with Dr. Nolan in his endeavor. The ATACAMA humanoid is only 6 inches tall, 13 centimeters. The body that is very desiccated but completely intact. The CAT scan clearly shows internal chest organs, lungs, and what appears to be the remains of a heart structure. There's absolutely no doubt that the specimen is an actual organism and that it's not a hoax of any kind. This fact has been confirmed by Dr. Nolan and Dr. Lachman at Stanford. The specimen has only 10 ribs, and finding not yet found in humans, and a very unusual cranium. It's noted that the cranial vault is proportionately much larger than is found in normal humans. The bones are quite well developed and are not those of a fetus. There are multiple skeletal anomalies seen throughout the specimen. Importantly, a mature, not fetal, tooth is seen in the mandible, the lower jaw. A fracture of the right humerus, the upper arm, is seen, as is a concave fracture of the right posterior lateral skull, which was most likely the cause of his death. Importantly, Dr. Lachman concluded that the humanoid's appearance is not the result of any known deformity or genetic defect, skeletal dysplasia, or any other known human abnormality. But most startling conclusion to date is that Dr. Lachman concluded the humanoid lived to be 6 to 8 years of age. He noted that there is no known form of human dwarfism that has this presentation and set of findings. No human has been known to be able to live for 6 to 8 years and remain only 6 inches in length. It should be noted also that Dr. Manchon of the Manchon Radiology Center in Barcelona also examined the x-rays and concluded that the specimen was most certainly not a fetus and had lived for a year or more, and probably several years. Previously, there had been false reports published elsewhere that the humanoid was a fetus. Well, it's not. It's certainly not the case, as can be concluded from the research of Dr. Lachman and the examination by Dr. Manchon. A comparison of fetus x-rays shows a remarkable difference between human fetus skeletal development and the x-rays of the Atacama humanoid. Painstaking and expert DNA extraction was done by Dr. Nolan at Stanford University. A very high quality and quantity of DNA was successfully extracted and it was analyzed. Only primarily preliminary analysis of DNA has been done to date, and Dr. Nolan notes that it may be a year or more before full manual analysis and confirmation can occur. Dr. Nolan says the DNA was of high quality, showing little to no serious degradation. He says also that sequence analysis definitively rules out specimen as an example of New World primate. Importantly, Nolan has found that preliminary results demonstrate no statistically relevant alterations of genes encoding proteins commonly associated with known genes for primordial dwarfism or other forms of dwarfism. Therefore, if there is a genetic basis for the symptoms observed in the specimen, the causal mutations are not apparent at this level of resolution and at this stage of the analysis. It should be noted that Neanderthals are 99.5% genetically identical to humans, and chimpanzees and apes are 96 to 97% identical. As of this date, the genotype does not match the phenotype, meaning physically expressed form of the genetics. The answer to this mystery will lead in further analysis of DNA and confirmation of the findings through the peer review process. Dr. Nolan's report is in the link here below, and you have to note that the DNA testing continues, it's not complete, concludes by stating further research is needed. The preliminary report demonstrates how currently available biomedical technologies can be readily applied to the analysis of archaeologically and anthropologically relevant human species with genetic disorders of unknown origin. This report is not a formal conclusion on the nature of the mutations or the underlying cause of the disorder in this human specimen. Currently, the data represents a 15-fold whole genome reading and as such is insufficient for definitive conclusions. Future plans include continued study of the specimen to establish up to a 50-fold WHS read that could point to targeted sequencing of hypothetical causal mutations. Comparison of the observed sequence variations against recently developed ethnically focused genome database is planned. Full analysis of the DNA and attempts to link genetics to morphology will eventually follow in an appropriately peer-reviewed article in an accredited scientific journal, and the results will be independently verified before publication. Clinically, given that this humanoid lived many decades to centuries ago, exact date remains unknown, but it's not a recently living specimen, obviously. It's hard to understand how a 6-inch baby or child could have lived to be 6 or 8 years of age in such a remote and undeveloped part of the world. Even in today's best neonatal intensive care units and ICU, we would hardly be able to keep such a specimen alive. As an emergency physician, he says, I have delivered premature infants as well as a significantly deformed one with anencephaly, and I'm struck by how small and fragile this humanoid is. Medically speaking, if this is merely a deformed human, it does not seem feasible that it would have lived to be 6 to 8 years of age. Speaking as a clinician, I, as well as the other doctors with whom I have spoken, doubt it would have lived 6 hours. It should also be noted that the specimen has a visible, well-developed tooth in the mandible, also not consistent with a human fetus of this size. Given how long ago he lived and how primitive that area would have been, totally lacking in modern medical technologies and facilities, how would this child have lived, and with whom? Certainly, there are many more questions than answers at this juncture. The mystery is further compounded by the reports from Ramon Navia Osorio Villar and his associates who traveled to the region and obtained information from local native people of sightings of UFOs and very small living creatures, fitting the general description of this humanoid. There are also reports that other intact humanoids may be stored in various remote sites and locations in this area. These reports have not been confirmed, however. It's necessary to do much more thorough research into this case. The DNA work is really in its early stages, and we need to take a scientific expedition to the Atacama Desert to see if there are more examples of this humanoid, and to see if indeed there is ongoing UFO ET activity in that region as reported. Now, hypotheses and thoughts. If the genetics continue to show a human connection to this humanoid, what does that mean? We cannot say the Atacama humanoid is an ET, nor is he any known or clinically conceivable human that could have lived. So, who is he? He remains a mystery, and perhaps, just perhaps, a doorway to discovering much about who we are. Recently, some scientists working on DNA and computer analysis found that DNA has been around for over 10 billion years, but Earth has been here for less than half that time. Perhaps life is indeed universal, and contact spreads life from world to world. I've discussed with other scientists the possibility of epigenetic augmentation of the human genome. Is the Atacama humanoid a so-called hybrid? Are we all some type of hybrid? Could this have occurred via contact with other extraterrestrial civilizations over millions of years? A source who refuses to be identified stated to me several years ago that he had seen a National Security Agency document that concluded that there had been 64 epigenetic augmentations of the human genome in the past that have resulted in modern humans. Could this be possible? A Jet Propulsion Laboratory JPL scientist once told me that the reason the objects found on and near Mars, like the obelisk that astronaut Buzz Aldrin wants us to go back to Mars to examine, would show an ancient connection between ETs and humans, and that this is why that information is being kept classified. And when I asked why, he said because the foundations of every fundamentalist orthodox belief system on Earth would be upended. So to pursue the science is to pursue the truth of matters, and what is needed from this point going forward is an open mind so that together we may discover the truth about many things yet hidden. And I'll leave below for you for the video. Basically, it says the same exact things I've just told you, but he does have his conversations with other doctors, and they go into more details as to their findings and confirm that this is not a fetus, and it looks like it's a humanoid. This is by Dr. Stephen M. Greer, MD, on Humans Are Free. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.